Today's episode is all about the messy, meaningful space where modern fatherhood meets the online world our children are navigating. We're talking with Amit Kalley, a teacher turned coach, father, husband, and founder of 4 Working Parents, about what it really takes for men to show up well at home, at work, and in life. Amit's journey is personal and powerful. From navigating life in the classroom to launching a business rooted in social change, his story opens up big questions about parenthood, screen time, and how workplaces still fall short when it comes to supporting mothers and fathers. We explore what's really going on in our schools, how realistic was adolescence, and what, as fathers, we can do to protect our kids from screens. But this isn't a conversation about blaming men or putting more on their plate. It's about letting go of outdated scripts and making space for a version of fatherhood and masculinity that feels real, connected, and human. So whether you're a dad yourself, thinking about becoming one, or just trying to make sense of what's going on with our kids, this episode has something for you. So if you've ever felt torn between being present and being productive, or stuck between the old expectations of masculinity and the new demands of parenthood, this conversation is a space to breathe, reflect, and reimagine what showing up can look like. Amit Kalley is the co-founder of 4 Working Parents, an organization that helps employers and families rethink how we support parents at work, in schools, and at home. A former teacher, he is also a coach, husband, and father himself, and blends personal insight with practical tools to create more inclusive spaces for growth and change. His periodic table of sinister emojis went viral recently following the Netflix series Adolescence, leading to interviews and appearances with BBC News, The New York Post, Fox News, and The Telegraph, to name but a few. And today, he's here with me and Feel Good. Amit, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Good. And look, I suppose, firstly, I was doing my research and seeing all the various places you're going over the next month. You're meeting with the UK Ministry of Defence, top law firms, councils, no doubt schools and parents as well, I'm sure. How are you doing, given all this whirlwind you find yourself in right now?
Yeah, it's good. It's fun. It's keeping me busy, which is it's always good to be busy, isn't it? Especially as a dad with 3 kids, it's nice to have that distraction sometimes. But it's intense. There's a lot going on, certainly over the next month or 2. But I'm not in a position to complain, that's for sure.
Yeah, nice, good. Well, long may it continue.
Thank you.
And look, we'll come on to a lot of those topics. But I guess where I'd really like to start is understanding a bit more about your upbringing. What is it that shaped your values and how you view the world and your work?
Yeah, gosh, where do I start? So, East London boy, born and bred to parents of Indian and Tanzanian origin. Yeah. So, from India, but born and raised in Tanzania, my parents, and then came over to this country in the 70s. And I was born in East London, grew up in East London, now live in Essex. Yep. So, kind of typical immigrant story, I guess, a little bit more affluence, and you sort of move a bit further out from the centre. And went to school, went to university, as is the done thing in our culture. Yeah. Became a teacher. Yeah. And then I guess worked my way up. And by the time I left education, I was a deputy head teacher in a secondary school in East London. And I guess, that's sort of, I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about what made me want to leave and all of those things. But that was 3 years ago. Yeah. Left education altogether 3 years ago, and I've been doing this since then.
Fantastic. Good. And was teaching always on the cards for you?
No, I don't think you ask any young person what they want to do when they get older. I don't think anybody's going to tell you they want to be a teacher. Yeah. It was actually my mum. I graduated with a degree in politics, had absolutely no idea what it was that I wanted to do. It wasn't one of those degrees that naturally lended itself to a particular career path. Yeah. And so my mum suggested, I was good at talking and shouting or whatever. So why don't you become a teacher? And I thought, okay, I'll look into it. And just sort of fell into it that way.
Yeah. And with everything going on at the moment in the men's world, I don't know if you've come across Richard Reeves' book of Men and Boys. And one of the things he talks about is the lack of male teachers. What was your experience as a male teacher, and do you agree with his views?
I think in secondary education, it's probably a bit more balanced. Yeah. I don't know what the exact stat is. It's probably closer to 50-50 than it is certainly in primary. I think primary education is still very much a female-dominated kind of industry. But in secondary, I didn't feel that there were I only ever worked in 2 schools in 10 years, but I didn't feel in either school that there were, there was an imbalance of more females than males. So I didn't see that, no.
Yeah, okay. And what about the premise of, I guess, everyone's talking about strong male role models at the moment, male teachers as role models for young boys?
I think there were plenty of, I'm just thinking about my own experience
Sure.
and conversations I've had with parents and children, I guess, in the years since. I think there probably were quite a few strong male role models. I think boys tend to navigate towards PE teachers by default, certainly the boys that are, more sort of sporty.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important as well, depending on where you are working in the country. If you're in a school that's demographics are quite mixed, it's really important, I think, that young boys and girls have role models that are people that look like them, and people that perhaps understand the cultural subtleties and the nuances that they grow up with, and the family lives that they experience. So I think me being in sort of senior leadership and education, perhaps, I don't know if I was ever a role model for anybody, but there were certainly some young people that would tell me that, I might even just say hello in the corridor. It might not be anything big, but they would say thank you. That resonates, or that means a lot to me. And I guess I sort of accidentally ended up being a role model to some young boys. The first school I worked at, it was split between girls and boys campuses, and I was based primarily at the boys campus. But it was a faith school, and I wasn't of that faith. So I don't know whether I was a role model to some of those boys. Certainly those that were more, leaning towards their faith. Maybe some that weren't as religious might have resonated with me. But the school in East London, very diverse. So I think it's important that whilst you need those kind of male role models for young boys in schools, you also need role models that come from a diverse range of backgrounds.
Okay, that makes sense. And look, I want to spend a bit of time on your time as a teacher, and we'll move on to what you're doing now with 4 working parents. But I guess, what are some, common misconceptions about teaching as a profession, about life at secondary schools, and I guess, given everything that's going on at the moment with this Netflix show, Adolescence, young boys' experience in particular, as you see it?
But the first thing that comes to mind actually is the school that was in Adolescence. A lot of criticism about what that school looked like and kind of how that school was in terms of kind of behavior, in terms of your teachers feeling out of control, basically. I mean, it was a disaster, that school. And there was so much criticism around, that's not what schools in the UK are like. Well, I can tell you that there are schools in the UK that are like that. The one that I worked at East London wasn't a million miles away from that environment where it was almost chaotic, and lots of teachers feeling out of their depth, out of control, haven't got a handle on things, students that were really challenging, really difficult. So I think that is, I would say some of that was quite real. It doesn't reflect the majority of schools in the country, of course, but certainly reflected perhaps some of the inner city ones that you get. In terms of the young boys' experiences, I mean, I remember dealing with, when I was a deputy head at the school in East London, a sort of case of misogyny, where a young lad was pretty disrespectful, pretty rude, pretty aggressive towards a young girl. These were 2 students in the 6th form. And looking back on it, I don't know if I handled it brilliantly. I'm not sure, because I felt some empathy towards the young lad as well, who felt that he was being victimized, being picked on, being bullied by this girl and her kind of group of friends. And he was a bit of a misfit in that kind of wider cohort. And I think by trying to strike a balance between the two, there was maybe a perception that I was ignoring the views of the young girl, which I absolutely intentionally did not do. But I just felt this young lad needed a bit of picking up, and he needed a bit of kind of lifting, because, I was, and this is before adolescence and really before we were talking about misogyny in schools. I'm talking 2021. People like Tate are popular at that stage, I'm sure. But so I don't know if I handled it properly. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. Could I have said a few things differently? Maybe. But I felt that the young lad needed a bit of picking up. I felt that he needed a bit of compassion and empathy. And that's what I was trying to do for him. But misogyny generally, I felt, was rife in the school culture. I felt that young lads, young boys, did have a fair few of them. Obviously, I'm generalizing here completely, but a fair few of them, I think, did have this view that there was a place for them in society, and there was a place for women in society. And that was worrying. It was worrying being an only child. It was worrying being the son of a mother. It was worrying being a husband. It was worrying being the father of a daughter. To think that young boys were having those kinds of views, because I would never have wanted those views to have been shared about the women in my life that were very important.
100%.
Did I do much about it? It wasn't really my remit. Yes, I'm a deputy head teacher. I challenged behaviour. Of course I did. And I challenged viewpoints. But there are great organisations out there that I think schools have to really invest in.
Yeah.
People who are trained, people who know how to work with kids, people who know how to challenge some of those views critically. One of the worst things I found, and teaching generally tends to be a more left-wing profession. Again, generalising here.
Yeah.
And I think when some teachers in the classroom would hear misogynistic views, they would shut it down by saying, that's disgraceful, that's out of order, don't you ever say that again, you are wrong. And all you do when you do that, albeit with good intentions, what you do is you push the boys further into the space and the influence that they're getting from online, because the online influencers are telling them that the women are going to respond like that. Alas, you see women responding like that, the influencers are therefore right. And so you are... those views that you're listening to and being fed are solidified on the basis of those influences being absolutely right about the responses you're going to get. And so tackling misogyny in schools, I think, needs to be done delicately. It needs to be done critically. It can't be done with this kind of shutting down of the views from boys or from girls. And you've got to get people who are trained in how to have those conversations, come in and deal with that. I think schools... of course, budgets are always an issue, but I think schools take a huge risk in trying to deal with that themselves with people who are trained to be teachers, not necessarily trained to have these kind of critical conversations.
Yeah, and teachers presumably whose days are already full, are already resource constrained, to then tackle a topic like this is...
Yeah, absolutely. Teachers are worked into the ground, a lot of them. And so, when I've spoken to some of them recently as a result of Adolescence and the work that I do now, they just say, this is yet another thing that we have to pick up on as teachers. We now have to check their mobile phone language and check whether kids are being groomed or check whether kids are being influenced negatively or whatever it might be. All I'm here to do is teach history or to teach science. Do I now need to pick up something else? Yeah. And so I think teachers are finding it really, really difficult. All the more reason why schools need to be spending some of that money that they haven't got on getting people in to support students, but also support the teachers. I'm worried about teachers not getting the right CPD and the right training. When I was in education, inset days were all about pedagogy and teaching styles and marking and all that kind of nonsense, I think personally, because you don't need an entire inset day to teach teachers how to be teachers. What you need is some of that more well-being piece. How do you look after teachers? How do you support teachers in picking up some of these signs? How do you train teachers to know what to do if they pick up some of these signs, who to speak to, how to have those conversations? That's what I want to see more of in schools. Yeah.
I think that would be very welcome if it was. And I guess we're a few weeks out from the release of Adolescence now, and I guess the dust is settling a little. And I've certainly seen two reactions. One is it's a drama, it's designed for parents to get them to watch it. And the other is it's actually a fairly accurate representation of what's going on in the schools. And it sounds like you're probably more in the latter camp of like, this is fairly representative of what's going on. Obviously not the extreme crime nature of it, but the experience in the school.
Of course. And you've got two options as a school leader or as, government officials that work in education. You can either bury your head in the sand and say, this is the UK, it's a great country, we don't have things like this here in this country. Or you can accept the reality, which is that when you speak to people on the ground and, if you're going to speak to a school in rural Berkshire, you might get the experience of a very positive monoculture kind of school where everything is wonderful. You come to a school in East London, which is demographically very different and where the backgrounds of these young people is very different. Many of them coming from immigrant kind of backgrounds themselves, not a case of their parents coming to this country. The kids themselves have only just arrived in this country. I mean, we had a student who had arrived from Afghanistan after the Taliban reclaimed that country. And he ended up at our school just because the lorry that he was on dropped him off on the road, and our school was the nearest school to where he was. And he ended up in our school. Didn't speak any English. You can only imagine what he's been through and what he's seen in his upbringing. Definitely wasn't the age that he said he was. We felt that he was probably a few years older than a year 10 student. But I think when you visit schools that deal with the reality of multicultural, multi-demographic Britain and all the challenges that brings, it's only then when you can appreciate the scale of the problem that we are facing. And, I don't want to catastrophize. And I think one of the accusations that I got when I put this periodic table together was that I was scaremongering and catastrophizing and all of those kinds of things. It's not about that at all. It's about speaking to the reality of
Yeah.
what's going on in schools and the reality of what parents are facing. You speak to lots of parents, they won't have a clue about what their children are doing online.
Yeah.
There is a growing movement of, stopping smartphones altogether, which is
Yeah.
great. I'm all for that. I
Yeah.
support that completely.
Yeah.
But for many parents, it's too late. They've already handed the devices over. Their kids now have access to a world they have no control over, and many parents have no knowledge of.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to accept we are where we are. And instead of trying to put sort of sticking plasters on this huge gaping wound, we need to really dive into where this problem is starting from and how we tackle it at the root cause.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, for me personally, one of the most heartbreaking parts of that show, my son's 9, my daughter's 7, was the final episode where the parents are going, well, we were good parents, weren't we? Like, we did what we thought was right. We gave him a computer. Who knew what he was going on? And that really struck home with me, because you're right. Most parents don't know my son's not online, my daughter's not online, but most parents probably don't know what's going on in their kids' hands with the access on their phones.
Yeah, I think the second you give your child a device that can connect them to the internet, and that access to the internet is unmonitored, i.e. they're spending some of their time in their room, either on their phone, on their laptop, their tablet, whatever it is, that is when you as a parent need to be having those regular conversations with your children about their online world. In the same way that our parents would say to us, how was school today? Most of us would just say it was fine. That was end of conversation.
Yeah.
Now we've got to reframe those questions completely. Who did you speak to online today? How was your interaction online today? Did you see anything online that worried you today? Did you receive any messages online that worried you today? Did you send any messages online today that maybe you shouldn't have sent? And it's about normalizing those conversations into your daily routines.
Yeah.
Because you cannot, as a parent, give your child unmonitored access to the internet and then expect them to be able to navigate that world on their own without support. And if you want to be the safe space, which most parent wants to be, for your child, when, and I say when, not if, something goes wrong, because for every child, something will go wrong on the internet. The scale obviously will vary, but something inevitably will go wrong. You want to be the person that your child comes to. But when they come to you, you need to have the tools and the knowledge and the skills to be able to deal with whatever it is that they're bringing to you. And the risk, I guess, is many parents parent in the same way that they were parented. And not all of us, but a lot of us were parented in a very different way, perhaps, to the way that we need to be parenting today. I can certainly speak about my own example, a more conservative kind of parenting, a lack of understanding about what's going on out in the real world, very sort of culturally, not religious driven. We weren't very religious as a family, but culturally driven. And sometimes when you try to implement the kind of values of your culture, in my case, that kind of Eastern culture, with the values that you're growing up in here in the UK, it can lead to a conflict. It's how you navigate that conflict as a parent that I think is really important.
How do you navigate that conflict? I mean, we've spoken a lot about your role as a teacher, but you're also a father. You've got 3 kids. How do you think about your role as a father and how you balance work, parenting, this online world too?
It isn't easy, that's for sure, because, I'm very proud of my heritage and very proud of my culture. My wife is from Tanzania herself as well, so we spend a lot of our time, every year we're making sure we're out in Tanzania. We're of Indian background, so we go to India whenever we can. I want my children to know who they are and where they come from. I want them to be proud of their background, religiously and culturally.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also want them to be very proud, very integrated, very assimilated into the British way of life, and I want them to feel very proud of being British in the same way that we as their parents do. And I think, it's about choosing your battles wisely as a parent. I think, you work out as a parent what's important to you. There are parents in my own Sikh faith who are going to be far more religious than I am, and for whom there are going to be lots of red lines around the religious kind of base. Well, it's about getting your children to understand why that's a red line for you. Because as they get older, it might not be a red line for them. And they may want to experiment in things if they're friends with people who are not from the same faith, who don't have those red lines. They may want to experiment in certain things. So you as a parent have to think about how are you going to navigate that challenge. Do we go the old-fashioned way and say, if you cross this red line, you're out of my house, in which case your relationship with your child is broken?
Yeah.
Or do you say things like, what you do outside of this house is up to you, but this is how we've brought you up. This is what we want you to be mindful of and respectful of. In our house, we don't do certain things. We don't allow certain things. And so we want you to be respectful of that. And maybe you find some sort of compromise in the hope that your child, as they get older, may come back to sort of where you are religiously or culturally. Or if they don't, it's about accepting that they are a human being in their own right.
Yeah.
And they do have the right to live a life as they choose. And if that disappoints you, tough luck.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Prepared to be disappointed.
Yeah, 100%. And as my kids get older, I think I'm starting to observe and realize that as much as we can try and, imbue lessons and virtues on them, they already come out with a certain set of hard coding, right? Which you can sort of guide, but they kind of are who they are. You've shared a lot there about, your experiences, and a lot of the work you do with for working parents is with parents directly, one-to-one coaching. What are some of the sort of biggest or most common struggles that parents are bringing to you, and especially dads in the context of masculinity?
Funnily enough, most of my private parent clients are mums.
Right.
And that's part of the narrative that we need to change. I think parenting is still seen as a mum job, and dad's job is to go out and earn money or whatever it might be. So I don't work with as many dads as I would like to work with. I would love for more dads to approach me and say, especially in my culture, most of the people that I work with come from my culture. I didn't set out for it to be that way.
Yeah.
But I think when somebody sees a kind of turban-wearing Sikh man on social media, you perhaps naturally are drawn to that cultural kind of reference point. And that's fine. It's okay. I don't mind. But in our culture, dads, are 10 steps behind the sort of Western culture, in the sense that it is still very much a traditional mum role to parent. And so the biggest challenge, without doubt, that I see when I work with individual parents is screens. And I have lost my child to screens, because that then leads on to all the other issues, which is my child is rude to me. My child doesn't communicate with me. My child doesn't listen to what I say. My child is always out late. It all comes back to the fact that they have been given screens, and all of the kind of communication that they have and all of the kind of information that they get is via their screens, their devices, the internet.
When you say screens, what do you mean, and how does that shift with age, with context? I think about my children. Screen can mean a bit of horrible histories on BBC, but it can also mean the PlayStation, can mean the iPad. Like where should the worry be?
Yeah, I think I draw the distinction at screens being things that allow you to connect to the internet.
Okay.
So my children watch TV.
Yeah.
I'd love to meet a parent for whom TV is banned in the house. But so my children will watch YouTube on TV, but it's in the living room, and my children are young. They're watching things like Lion Guard and Peppa Pig and those kinds of Bluey and those kinds of things, right? But as soon as we might notice the arrow moving towards a different thing, we will immediately put a ruling in, and we have sort of coded language in our house that this is not okay. We speak to our children in mother tongue, so Punjabi. So we would say to them, it's not okay to watch this program. And at the moment, they're young. They're very much on board. We're aware that as they get older, they're going to start challenging our viewpoints a bit more. So it's for us to sort of reframe our language around what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. What they don't have, and what I advise parents to refrain from, is they don't have iPads, which they use in their own time. They don't have phones. They don't have TVs in their rooms. They don't have gaming consoles. Any of these things that take them away from being children. And I think, when I speak to parents who push back on my view, they might see me as a bit radical on this kind of no screens kind of thing. They turn around and say, well, actually, there's so many educational apps and things on the iPad that my children use. Yes, there are. Great, brilliant. But is their life going to be worse off if they don't have those access to those educational apps? Because right now they might be watching educational and viewing educational apps, but tomorrow they're going to be accessing something that isn't very educational, that maybe is borderline educational. And where do you then start doing your own research as a parent as to what's appropriate, what's not? Many parents don't have time. Many parents feel that they're out of touch with technology. Again, something I push back on, because I think if a parent says, I'm too old for tech, well, then your child shouldn't be having any tech. Because if you're too old for tech, that means you are completely out of touch with what they're accessing and what they're looking at. So if you're giving them a device, you better start putting your research in and start putting your time into researching what they're looking at, what's out there, what possibilities there might be, social media, for example, things like that. So, I think the distinction for me would be any device that has a gaming feature, because games are incredibly addictive. Children are often spending lots of their parents' money on credit cards, buying skins and in-app coins and all those kinds of things. So anything that's gaming or internet related, for me, is a no-go. Yeah,
okay, that's interesting, because it sounds like there is something about not just the content, but what the content can lead to in terms of, other more addictive things like games, but also other content that is going to do them a disservice?
Yeah, I think so. I think the gaming aspect is often ignored. I think a lot of parents feel that there's no harm in my child playing a bit of Roblox, or if they're a bit older, a bit of Call of Duty. It's only a game, or FIFA or whatever it might be. But what parents, I think, perhaps struggle with is then the addiction element. That actually you can't drag your child away from the screen. And actually, if you do drag them away from the TV screen where they've got their PlayStation plugged into, then they're on their phone. They're playing that same game on their phone because they cannot be drawn away from it. Because a lot of those games are obviously playing against each other. They're playing against their friends. They're playing against people from all over the world. They don't want to then go to school the next day and be the kind of odd one out who's not been on that game. But we've got to really push back against that. There are great movements like Smartphone-Free Childhood, who are becoming more and more popularized. And so your child being left out it's not a unique thing anymore. There are more and more children who are not going to have access to their devices. And it starts immediately for me with schools banning devices. In schools. I am shocked actually that so many schools still operate on the basis of we don't want to see your phones out.
Yeah, this was something I wanted to talk about because you posted recently about disagreeing with the statement that mobile phone use was under control in schools, and you've banned it when you were in education yourself and saw positive effects. Where do you think this conversation is going off the rails?
Yeah, I think that's nonsense. I think for the Children's Commissioner, and she's far better paid and far better researched than I am. I'm just basing it on anecdotal conversations that I've had with people and also schools that I've visited since, not just since being in schools, but since doing the work that I do. I think it's nonsense to say that schools have it under control. And lots of school leaders will say that we have strict policies here where children are not allowed to have their phones out. And if they are, they're confiscated. Very few schools, I think at last checking, it was about 11 or 12% of schools have an outright ban where you have to lock them away in the morning and you can only collect them in the afternoon. Because I think there's two issues. I think in one of the issues is that lots of senior leaders don't have the energy perhaps to take this battle on, because it's a big battle and it's going to last a long time, and you're going to get lots of resentment from the kids, and you might get some resentment from parents, and you'll get ideological viewpoints from governors and from whatever. There's that issue. And two, I think teachers and senior leaders don't have the resources necessarily, whether that's financial or time, to implement such a thing. But I did it when I was an assistant head teacher. I led on a whole school ban of mobile phones. We rejigged the timetable, so you had form time in the morning and form time in the afternoon. We had funding was to get lockers in each form room, and they were locked away. Of course, kids are going to find ways around it.
Sure.
They're going to bring what they call burner phones, or they're going to just, depending on how strong the form tutor is, they might just, wrap them around their little finger and say, yeah, I've locked it away, but actually it's in my pocket. But what it did do was it allowed teachers to teach. It allowed teachers to find their love of their subject again, because they weren't spending all their time dealing with arguments that no doubt came with having to confiscate a phone, because you've got to follow school policy. Otherwise, the head teacher's going to be on your back. You walk past a kid with his phone. Why didn't you confiscate it? Well, some teachers don't feel they have the tools to be able to get into that debate with a student, and so they just turn a blind eye to it. So what we end up with is this huge grey area where, yes, according to the Commissioner, 90% of secondary schools have a no phone policy. But in terms of actually having no phones on site, that is a completely misleading figure. It's false. And it is doing the whole debate a disservice. The data from Australia, which I posted about a little while ago, is telling. There's some data that's come out of South Australia, the state, where, behavior has improved massively. Teacher-student relationships have improved massively. The well-being of children has improved massively. We've got to look at countries and governments that are taking bold steps. And what we do in this country, as great as this country is, without doubt, we're biased, obviously, the best country in the world.
Sure.
But what we do brilliantly in this country is we argue and we debate. We've been talking about building a third runway at Heathrow for 30 years, probably before both of us were born. And we've not put a piece of cement in the ground yet. With this debate, it's the same thing. We are talking it into oblivion.
Yeah.
Because ideologically we're divided. There is the section that says children deserve rights, they deserve their freedom. Banning is not the answer. We've tried banning other things, it doesn't work. They find ways around it. Then you've got the other debate, which is, we've got to look out for their well-being. We've got to show them this is the best thing for them and their future, so we've got to ban them. And all we're doing is debating and talking. We're not taking any action.
And that's what I think is so amazing about something like smartphone-free childhood, right? Because it seems to me that while this debating is happening, as you rightly say, and we're waiting for anything to be debated at Parliament, parents are just going, I can't do this anymore. Let's just mobilize ourselves. And, my wife and I are of the age where our kids, we actually home educate now. So we're insulated from some of the social pressures that come with other kids having phones. But we saw it pop up, these first WhatsApp groups in our area. Then it made its way to the school. Then it made its way to a cluster of schools. And I think my perception of that, and I'd be interested to see whether you agree, is that is parents filling the leadership void that they don't see elsewhere because their experience on the ground is just awful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've had a few chats with the founders of Smartphone-Free Childhood. Yeah. Amazing, amazing work they've done. It just started off as a grassroots, small thing, and it's just blown up and it's gone absolutely viral. And good for them, good for their movement. But it shows exactly what you're saying. It shows how many parents feel that schools, society, government is out of touch with the reality of what's going on the ground. They're out of touch with the reality of the world that they are living in. They're living this world in their four walls where screens have somehow taken over and made their home a negative environment.
Yeah.
And they're thinking, sod this, let's like you say, mobilize and take our own action. Let's join this cluster, chapter, whatever they're called, and let's get some unity together.
Yeah.
And then what you get is parents that are united.
Yeah.
And also what you find is so many young people are willingly now giving up their mobile phones and social media access because of how terrible social media makes them feel. They've grown up in an era of knowing no different. Social media's been around, 20 years now. So they've grown up in that era. But the number of young people, teenagers, that are willingly giving up social media is telling. Now, obviously, it's not a majority,
sure,
but it is a strong minority of young people that are giving up their phones, giving up their social media lives, and are better off because of it. So if, we talk about we've got to listen to the kids and we've got to listen to what they're saying. And yes, the majority are going to say we want our phones. Why do they want their phones?
Yeah.
Because they're addicted. They get the dopamine highs off the likes and things in their comments. They access their favorite influencers, positive or negative, online. They play games with their friends. Who is going to want to willingly give that life up? It's only when you show them what life might be like without that digital kind of pressure, and if you want to go one step further, poison. Unless you show them what life can be like, they're never going to agree to have that life because they don't know any better. So this is where I think as adults we need to sort of, and I'm all for advocating for children having their voice, but I think on something like this is about protecting the well-being and the mental health of our children today and in their future. And I think if we don't take action, we are going to be the generation that the next generation resents greatly for sitting on our hands and sort of arguing and debating it whilst they continue to get ill, unwell, and,
So, I mean, this is a generation that's been exposed to a massive social experiment, right? And we're seeing the outcome now. And as you were speaking, I wonder if maybe it's too hard to say if most of your clients are women, are mothers. But I've been speaking on this podcast about the sort of provider-protector archetype that the father normally inhabits. And it seems strange to me that not so many fathers, at least that I see, approach the protector archetype as it relates to screens and protecting our children from those negative influences that we know are out there. Do you experience that? Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, I think so. And even the work I do with organizations and corporates, I run webinar after webinar on digital safety and online parenting and having the right conversations and those things. And I do get some dads attending those sessions, which is great. But I think the protector kind of role is stereotypically around financial protection. The man has to earn more money and provide for his family. And I think it's around, providing the home and providing all those things, the clothes and all of those things. And And yeah, you're right. With the screens, it's a case of, oh, I don't know too much about this. Everybody else is just giving their kids screens. It makes my life easier as a parent. We can go to a restaurant and not have our kids tearing the place down. So let's chuck a device in their face for an hour and a half while, myself and my wife can have a glass of wine and sort of enjoy a good conversation and enjoy our meal. So I think that whole protective thing in that context goes out the window. But I wouldn't even frame it in that kind of language. It's about parents, I think, doing the best by their children. And sometimes that means being unpopular.
Yeah.
How many times did we go through as children not liking our parents? You live through that life as a teenager because parents impose rules on you that you think are unfair. And in some cases they are unfair and they come without reason. So I think now when I work with parents and when I work with organizations and schools, the advice is always, if you are going to put in an expectation, I call it, as opposed to a rule, if you're going to put in an expectation, you've got to explain to your children why that expectation is coming in. So present them with the research, present them with the facts, say that actually the digital world is causing this kind of damage to children. These influences are not good for you. Here's the research. Show them that it's not just you waking up one day saying, right, today we're done with screens. Enough. Yeah. Because they're going to see that as unfair. And they're not going to respond positively to that. So I work on a digital charter with parents a lot, which is all around families coming together and putting together a list of expectations around screen use and device usage in the house. But that is where children's voices are heard. They contribute to the charter, and parents and children compromise on something that works for the whole family. And then the entire family sticks by that charter, which is like an organic document that you revisit every couple of months as things might change.
So what's your message to the man who's listening who says, yeah, I get it, but I'm also trying to think about the unhealthy food they're eating or the lack of exercise or the social connection at the same time as I'm trying to run a business or be a good employee, and I haven't had some alone time with my wife for a very long time. How do you deal with those parents who come to you with this massive mix of priorities?
It is tough. I think the way I see it is parenting in this generation, I think, is the hardest generation to be a parent. And the reason for that is because I think it's the hardest generation to be a child. I think children, the generation that they are, thank God there was no social media when I was at school, that's for sure. Because the kind of school that I went to, rough and ready school kind of, it would have been carnage. And so I feel for children deeply growing up in this era of social media and kind of digital issues. And so what I would say to parents is, yeah, of course, you've got to think about what your priorities are. But the most important thing about that is, why are they your priorities? So if it's food, for example, why is your child not having processed food or having the right kind of foods a priority for you? If it's because you saw something on the internet that told you that processed foods are terrible for your children, then I'm not sure that's a good enough reason unless you've actually conducted really solid research of your own that's taken into account all the different kind of factors on it and looked at different studies. But what I would say is that phones, screen usage, internet use, and the influence that people can have on your children and the conversations that strangers can have with your children, I think I can't see, and I'm just trying to think, I can't think of anything being a bigger concern than that for parents, unless you have a physical health issue or a disability of any kind that you have to deal with. I can't think of anything that, for me, given what I've seen and given what I've worked with and given the research that I've done, I can't see a bigger challenge right now and a bigger priority right now for parents than to ideally build no relationship with screens. Sure. But if you have got screens for whatever reason, build healthy relationships with screens.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. I want to pivot a little bit to talk about, I guess, the workplace, which is part of what you do as well. How do you help organizations become more inclusive for working parents? And are there any places where you see them really getting this right?
Yeah. So, lots of the bigger companies and some of the great little startups, who genuinely care about their employees, genuinely want their employees to be able to thrive at work, I think now recognize that in order for employees to thrive at work, they need to be able to thrive at home. And I think if there was anything good that came out of COVID, there wasn't very much good that came out of it, but if anything good came out of it, it was a resetting of the work-life relationship, where I think a lot of people now taking control of their kind of well-being, they're taking control of their family time, they're taking control of, things outside of work. Before COVID, if your boss called you at 10 o'clock and said, I need this by tomorrow morning, you would drop everything and you would do it. That's just the way society was. Now, in most jobs, if your boss sort of tried to call you after 5 o'clock, your phone would be off.
Yeah.
Because after 5 o'clock, I'm logged off. It's my time with my family or whatever it is that I do to make me feel good so that I can turn up as the best version of me tomorrow at work. And so I've done some really great work with some organizations around kind of engaging their parent and carers sort of networks and people within that group around online safety, around understanding the online world. We do some work around social media because a lot of parents think that social media is relatively harmless. They think that TikTok and Snapchat is what all the kids have, and so it's okay. So I do some work around, what are some of the challenges of those social media channels. And if your kids are on them, I try never to tell a parent to take your children off social media. That's a parenting decision that you have to make yourself.
Yeah.
All I can do is give you the data, give you the research, give you the information for you to then make an informed decision based on what I've said and based on all the other research that you as a parent should be carrying out. And I've worked with some great organizations, and I've got some work booked in with some great organizations, big law firms, organization in construction, some schools. There's no industry, I'm not industry specific, right? There's no particular industry that leans itself towards this kind of work. Any employer that employs people who are parents, carers, or aspiring parents needs to be looking after their well-being, needs to be supporting them, because if you can help them thrive at home, purely selfishly from a business case, if you're a manager that only cares about business, it's in your best interest to help your parents and carers thrive, because if they have a good home life, they're going to turn up to work and give you their 100%. Whereas if their home life is a challenge, if they're parenting, if there are issues around their relationship with their children at home, they may not show up as the best version of themselves at work, and that's a problem for you as a leader.
Yeah. Do you think it's mostly about flexibility in terms of location and hours, or are there broader topics than that you're working with them on?
So my areas of working is all around sort of parental mental health well-being and digital kind of parenting.
Okay.
I don't really get stuck in with the flexibility thing. I think most good organizations have pretty decent flexible hybrid kind of working patterns. And I think what organizations are finding now is if you haven't got good policies in place, people just leave.
Yeah.
I don't think people care about their jobs now in the way that they did pre-COVID.
100%.
Where they felt, gosh, if I leave this job, I'm stuck. I need this job, therefore I'll do anything. I think now people are realizing there are companies out there that are wanting you. They want you to bring your authentic, true self with all your challenges and all your strengths with you, because we will support you with those challenges and we will help you develop those strengths. So those companies that are going back to the old model, or those companies that refuse to change altogether, I think are going to find themselves short of good quality talent. Yes, you're going to get grads who are desperate for work.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to work for PwC or for KPMG or whatever it is, so you're always going to have 100 people looking to fill one vacancy. But if that person then leaves in 2 years, you're then spending all that money on recruitment, you're spending all that money on training somebody new, you haven't got longevity, you're not able to promote your good talent because they want to leave because I'm just name dropping PwC and KPMG. I don't know what their policies are necessarily. They're just big companies that people want to work for. And so if you haven't got those policies in place, people will leave. So I don't really get stuck into the policy side of things. Mine is more about coming in and delivering informative, engaging sessions that are designed to upskill parents on their own mental health and their well-being, their relationships with their children, and the wider online world and this thing that I call digital parenting.
Yeah. I mean, that's almost more important, right? My day job is as an HR consultant. And I think the policies, particularly with ChatGPT now, they're all available. They're all online. You can get it pretty quick. And actually, you can also tell what policies every company has pretty easily. It's more the application of those policies in practice and what surrounds them, like, an understanding for what it means to have good mental health as a parent.
Yeah, and I think the best managers and the best leaders are the ones that, I've heard some stories of companies that I've worked with where they've said that, the first day here, the manager said to me, you are never going to miss a nativity play. You are never going to miss a parents' evening. You are never going to miss your child's first, whatever it might be, or anything. If you've got teenagers, you're not going to miss things that your child is going to resent you for later in life for not showing up. Because I can tell you as a manager and leader, I'm going to go to all my children's plays and whatever it is they're doing. And I just thought that was so refreshing to hear managers and leaders. And these aren't managers and leaders that necessarily have young kids of their own. These might be managers and leaders that are in their 50s and 60s that are past that kind of worrying about their children. But they still recognize how important it is for parents to be present. And then you do have the other side of managers who kind of think, actually, this is work. I don't give a shit about, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear.
Yeah, please.
Don't care about what's going on at home. Leave it at home. When you walk through this door, it's about work.
Yeah.
And those leaders and managers, I think, are going to struggle to get the very best talent that's out there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I always say to the clients that I work with that, like, nowadays you are no longer recruiting in a vacuum, right? People know about your culture, they know about your benefits, and they're going to be weighing these things up, like what it means to be a parent working at this company.
Yeah, and what most working parents don't want is, you see these list of perks.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, after work drinks on a Thursday. No good to most parents because they've got to pick up their kids, or they've got to do dinner time, or there's a table tennis table in the lobby or whatever it is. I mean, these are ridiculous kind of perks. We've got to do better. We've got to put perks in place and policies in place that make a meaningful difference to parents. And it's, then I get the criticism that actually not all of our employees are parents. So why should we single out parents and give them better? It's not about equality. It's about equity. And I think that's really important. Until we understand that it's not about giving everybody equal kind of treatment, it's about giving people equitable treatment. So if a parent needs certain things that make their lives better as a parent, a 25-year-old that's not a parent might need certain things that make his or her life better 100%. As a 25-year-old. So be equitable. Don't worry about being equal. Yeah. Equality is long gone. When we use that word equality in the workplace, it's sort of, I just find it outdated. It's about how can we as an employer be equitable so that we're supporting our parents and carers, but we're also supporting people who are not in that kind of zone, in that kind of stage in life, and making sure that they have appropriate benefits and appropriate policies that help them be the best versions of themselves as well.
Yeah. And look, those are a lot of things that organizations can do. But if we think about individual agency that men can have, fathers can have, what's an action that men can take like today to make them feel better as a father, as a parent?
I think one of the things that I've learned in my own parenting journey, but also working with and speaking to lots of parents is, being present. And I know that sounds simple and it sounds easy, but being present for your children, I think is so, so important. So I think, where you've got a busy diary, if you're running a business and, you've got deadlines and you've got money to earn or people to pay, or if you're an employee and you've got deadline, whatever it might be, try and find space in your diary to just block out time to spend with your child and make sure that that time you're spending with your child isn't in front of the TV watching their favorite film. There is time and a place for that. Of course there is. But do things that they enjoy, even if they're things that you don't enjoy. A lot of our children end up with your love for things that you don't know where it's come from, right? Yeah. Because you and your partner have no love for that thing. But I would say carve out time to be present.
Yeah.
And it's something I'm working on actually. We've spent all this time talking about phones and social media and stuff. The irony is smartphone-free childhood and myself, all the work that I do and get is from social media. Yeah. So I'm not here bashing social media because social media is incredibly powerful. And the business that I run, the chai business that my wife and I run, that all, social media is benefiting those businesses. But it's about, so I'm sort of wrestling with my own relationship with my phone and social media. But it's about spending that quality time with your child. If your child likes football, kick a ball with them. If your child likes horses, go and see some horses, go to a farm, whatever it might be, just find time in your diary. Because, what's that phrase? I've forgotten it now, but it's something along the lines of, the only people that will remember that you worked long hours are your children. Your employee at the end of the day isn't going to give a damn. Yeah. And I've learned this firsthand. I worked long hours in my first job and felt that, I was owed something because of that. Nonsense. Yeah. A, I'm not owed anything. Yeah. It was a choice that I made. Yeah. And B, the employer isn't going to differentiate between me and somebody else that works much shorter hours or doesn't stay after school until 7 o'clock. They don't give a damn. They just want their work done. Yeah. So all of this, I don't buy into spending hours and hours and hours at work unless, of course, you have a job which is high pressurized and there are certain pinch points in the year where you just need to knuckle down, get that, understand that, respect that, but find time for your children where you can. Yeah, totally agree. And you have a digital parenting checklist, and one of the things on there is to be a digital role model, which feels massive in this conversation, right, in terms of the way our children see us interacting with our technology. Yeah, and like I said, that's something I'm working on because, my work is all on social media. I'm responding to messages, I'm putting out posts, I'm interacting with other people. I do spend too long on my phone, and I know when my wife watches this, she will totally agree. And so it's something that I'm trying to work on, especially in my children's presence. Yeah. So if I'm sitting with them and I'm on my phone, I mean, my daughter's told me a couple of times actually. She's 4, going on 14, like most of them are. But she's told me, she said, "Daddy, look, you're always on your phone. Put your phone down." And I just think, gosh. Yeah, she's 4 and she's picked up on that. Yeah, that is a problem, and I need to do better. on that. So if you're a parent watching this and, you've got that problem, I feel you, I hear you, I am you.
Yeah.
We've just got to sort of try to reset that balance and also get over our own addictions, the devices that are in our pockets or on our desks or wherever it might be.
Yeah, 100%. It feels like sometimes we've got these massive, complex, societal issues going on, but a lot of it comes down to like, what do our kids see their parents doing? What agency do we have to make a difference today? And that could be one of those things.
Yeah, modeling I think is really important. You've got to model what you are preaching to your children.
Yeah.
Because children now are, they're more sort of, if they've got access to smartphones and the internet, they're getting told lots of things by lots of other people about how being a child should be and what being a parent should be. And so they're going to always be questioning you. So I think being a role model as a parent is, it's really, really, being a positive role model is really important.
100%. And one of the things I saw you post recently, which really struck home with me was, when adolescence becomes yesterday's news, what will you have done to make tomorrow safer?
Yeah, and I mean that because the hype around adolescence, that periodic table that I made of emojis, it went ridiculously globally viral. I was inundated with requests for the table. And like you mentioned at the beginning, some of the media kind of picked up on it and it was great, but I got a lot of negative feedback on it as well from children primarily who felt that I was lying, who felt that I was an old man that's out of touch with reality. And that those emojis don't mean them. And my response to young people and to adults, by the way, who accuse me of lying and scaremongering and, all that kind of stuff is knowledge is power. Just because you don't know something, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So just because you don't know that emoji could represent membership of white supremacy or far-right groups, it doesn't mean it doesn't represent membership of white supremacy or far-right groups. What I'm trying to do is educate you. Why would you reject education as though we live in this weird era now, don't we, where people say the mainstream media is poisoning us, it's lying to us, and I can only believe these fringe influencers, and as if they're telling you the truth. I have no agenda. I didn't put this periodic table together to go on to BBC News or Fox News or be in the Telegraph or whatever newspaper it was. They contacted me and said I'm not a representative of mainstream media. I'm just me doing my job. And so if any media channel, a fringe channel said to me, will you come on? I'd probably say yes, because for me, it's A, raising my platform selfishly, and B, it's having an impact on more people. I don't mind the negative kind of comments as long as you're open-minded to knowledge that you don't already possess.
Well, look, ironically, we met each other through a WhatsApp group of a community of dads building companies. So I can testify to the fact that you were as surprised as anyone that went viral. But like you say, and I can't think of many people better qualified than yourself as a former teacher who now works with schools, educations, and parents directly to comment on that. So, I think look, what good comes of it, should come from it. So
yeah, absolutely. I want to work with far more schools than I currently work with. I want schools to be proactive on this. I don't want schools to say we're going to manage this in-house. It's not something that school leaders and teachers A, should be managing in-house, and B, are necessarily trained to manage in-house. So I want to work with teachers. I want to work with parents. I want to work with organizations to run more and more sessions around digital parenting and around sort of parental well-being and mental health. And I want to work with more individual parents. I want to work with more dads on kind of, navigating those parental challenges. I want to help people build healthier relationships with screens. I don't have an agenda of telling you to put the screens away altogether. Whilst I promote that view, I don't force it upon you. If you choose to give your child a screen, that's fine. But let's make sure that relationship with the screen is a healthy one. It's a monitored one. And you as a parent are aware of all the dangers that exist out there so that you can keep your children safe.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I think, if I had to guess, I would suspect some of the reaction probably comes from a place of like shame or guilt, right? That maybe people have already seeded on screens when they perhaps know it's not the best thing for them, but it takes a bit of pressure off somewhere, or they didn't even really think it through, and here we are.
100%. I've had conversations with people who have given their children phones, who know their children are addicted, who then try to convince me that it's not a problem and that actually by not giving your child a phone, you are actually punishing them, you are isolating them, you are opening them up to bullying, you are ruining their lives basically. So there are people out there, there are parents out there who will try and justify their child's addiction or their child's screen issues by saying it's a good thing. But I know deep in their hearts, the vast majority of those parents do not believe that their child being addicted to their phones and being addicted to games and the cyberbullying, either being a victim or a perpetrator of that cyberbullying, or the access to the open access to pornography that children have now. I don't think many parents, I'd be very surprised if too many parents are lining up saying, I stand by my decision to give my child their phone.
Yeah, it's a bit like, no one being happy that they worked those extra hours and missed the play. As I said to my wife the other night, I just can't imagine us turning around in 10 years' time and being like, I'm so glad we gave them a phone when we did, right? Rather than holding off for a few hours. It
doesn't make any sense, does it? It doesn't make any sense at all. So, where I would advise we refrain from giving devices of any kind to our children. If you are going to give a device, my advice is just to make sure that relationship with the device is a healthy one.
Yeah. And
you as a parent, engaged, educated, and upskilled on all the dangers that are out there so that you can keep your children safe online.
Great. Look, I want to be respectful of time, so I need to sort of land this plane at some point. One of my ambitions is to build a bit of a feel-good book club for dads. Is there a particular book that you think every good man or good dad should read?
Yeah, it's on this same topic. I think it's The Anxious Generation.
Yeah, okay.
By Jonathan Haidt. I think it's a fantastic book around screens and around the, he's an academic, he's a researcher, and he knows what he's talking about. And he writes brilliantly about the kind of damage that screens are doing to our children from a kind of self-esteem, confidence, body image kind of point of view, but also this rewiring of our young children that access to the internet and access to social media and everything has had. So it might not be a very good feel-good book, forgive me, but I think it's a really important book that every dad, every parent or carer should read.
Yeah, fantastic. And look, whether it's through your experiences as a father or a teacher or now running your own business and a second business with your wife, which we didn't really speak about, like what does healthy masculinity mean to you?
For me, it's showing up to my children as who I am. So I'm an adult with an ADHD diagnosis. You may have sort of seen a bit of fidgeting and whatever. That's who I am. I'm not trying to hide that from my children. I think previous generations, certainly in my culture, would hide any kind of diagnosis like that, wouldn't accept it, wouldn't believe it. So I think it's showing up as your true, authentic self. If you can stand in front of your child and say what you want, be who you are, without having to mask, without having to hide, I think that is demonstrating to your children that being a man is far greater and far more than earning good money or working really hard or, telling mummy what to do or those kinds of things. And, I've got a daughter and two sons. And I think it's equally important that my daughter sees what healthy masculinity looks like. But I think it's even more important, I would argue, perhaps, that my sons see what healthy masculinity looks like. I don't want them growing up thinking that they have to behave in a certain way or that they have expectations on how a woman should have to behave around them. So it's, be authentic, be true, be yourself. And, if you need to cry for whatever reason, you don't have to go into your room to do it. You can do it openly in front of people that love you and people that you love, because that's you being authentic and being true.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, look, I can't think of a better message to end on. So if people want to learn more about the work that you're doing, where can they find you?
Great. Yeah, they can connect with me on LinkedIn at Amit Kalley. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at For Working Parents. And the website is, which a dad in our group is redoing for me at the moment.
Okay, great.
Is www.forworkingparents.com.
Fantastic. Well, look, I'll share all of those links in the show notes. And are there any final thoughts or invitations to the men and dads that are listening?
Be more open about your parenting journey. Being vulnerable, I think, is a strength. Showing your vulnerability is a strength. Let's move away from those bygone eras where a man displaying any form of vulnerability was seen as a weakness or was seen as being a certain way. I think, be vulnerable, be open, be authentic, and reach out for help if you feel that you need it. There's nothing more powerful than having a coach, a therapist, a counselor, whoever it might be, that can support you through some of your challenges. Because if you want to be the best parent, the best dad that you can possibly be, you've got to be the best man that you can possibly be first. And I think that's really important.
Amen to that. Well, Amit, it's been a pleasure having you. Thanks for coming on Feel Good, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If you got something from today's conversation, do me a favor, like, subscribe, or share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. It really helps the show grow and reach more men who are ready for change. And if you're curious about coaching or want to dig deeper into writing and reflections around purpose, well-being, and modern masculinity, head over to thefeelgoodfolk.com. Everything's there, and you'll find the link in the show notes, along with all of Amit's great work. This podcast is about rallying good men who want to grow, lead, and live with intention, so that together we can reclaim masculinity as a force for good. Thanks for listening. Work hard, be kind, and I'll catch you in the next one.